Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Rogue Health Economist. This is going to be a great week. Thank you so much for being here this week. I'm super excited to feature some real game changers this week. It's going to be, we're going to get really to the core of the matter on what it's going to take to really bend the health curve downwards and create the sustainable medical system that we all want to see. Over the last 4 weeks, I've been talking a lot about concepts like functional medicine and ways of creating self-efficacy. And I'm super excited to have here a great friend of mine, someone who's been on the front lines of really helping people get to the core of their issues and creating transformation with their people. So please welcome Alee Hoffman. Welcome, Alee.
Hi, thank you. Hey, James. Hey, everybody.
Great to be here with you here today. So let's jump into it. You know, at this moment of recording, it is we are on May the 26th. We're still in a sort of a lockdown, post-lockdown scenario, depending on which state and country you're in. And, we're here today to talk about functional medicine and a transformational path to health. But I know that you've been quite involved in trauma. And I guess I just want to just ask you, do you see any trauma in the world right now?
I don't know, James, do you see any trauma in the world right now? I think, and we were just talking about this, it's, there's really no position, there's a lot of intense, divisive, powerful positions people are taking about what's happening, what should be happening. And I think now that lockdown is happening in some areas, not in others, it's almost more unsettling energetically. But there's really no position that's not terrifying and traumatic. Like no matter what and so many people feel so deeply about their position on this. And every one of the positions is very scary. And it's very based on not being able to trust large groups of people. And it's all, and at the same time that it's based on not being able to trust large groups of people, it's also based on having to have everyone agree with you to be safe.
Yeah.
And that's a trauma response. When people are on the alert and everyone for themselves and I can't trust these people, but I can't survive unless I can trust these people. Many of us are being re-triggered because we've all felt afraid. We've all felt, afraid of a health diagnosis, afraid of catching something. Like these are psychological, they're in our psyche, afraid of not being able to protect ourselves or someone else, afraid of having to be trapped. So it's like all these things are being re-triggered, let alone the broadcast that's happening. And then you've got a lot of positions that I feel like the origin of them is trauma. It's not necessarily a sustainable way forward. It's a response that's coming from a traumatic reference point.
And the good news is, if this conversation interests you, the good news is that next week we're going to have a whole week on trauma where we're going to speak to lots of people who are working on the front lines of trauma. We're going to be talking about ACEs. We're going to be talking with Mastin Kip about trauma-informed care. But I guess I just wanted to kick off the conversation. I think it's such an amazing point that you made that it just really deeply resonated with me, that not just is everyone feeling unsafe, but most people's position is that in order for them to feel safe, everyone's going to have to agree with them. And that is really not a reasonable reality to aim to. And so ultimately we have to start to think about what are ways that we can create safety. And we'll get to that as we move along. But I guess as a sort of a launch to that, ultimately part of this plan with Find Functional and the Rogue Health Economist is going to be large scale behavior change. And I guess I'd just love for you to share a little bit of your experience of working with people who are traumatized and trying to facilitate behavior change, and what patterns come up and what things come up that maybe people who are listening to this can resonate with.
Yeah, beautiful. So, first of all, trauma, I think sometimes our association with trauma is either like you have to have gone through a war to be able to use that terminology. And then we're also really loose about it. Like, I feel like it's become this thing where it's like, oh, I can't go back to that restaurant. It gave me PTSD, and it's just like, so people are either like, I haven't had a big enough thing happen where that could be the reason I'm being held back, or we're very loose and casual about it. But to be a human being is to experience trauma. It's a very normal thing. If, we all experience something that's shocking, that's painful, that's hard at a certain time. And when that happens, we go into a trauma response, and it's just a very common thing to have certain things happen that are very defining for our brain that is trying to survive, where it's like, okay, I now need to take this traumatic experience and it needs to become a part of my personality so that I can survive. And I think it's very clear if we look at history that pretty much our history is built on trauma. This country is built on slavery. If you look at Europe, I mean, if you look at any country, like there's traumatic origins to how our infrastructures were built. And so there's behaviors and practices and ways of being and rules for living and negotiating and navigating our relationships that were really based on trauma survival and having traumatic things happen. There's been a lot of trauma in the world. I don't think there's always been a lot of trauma healing and resolution. That's kind of a newer concept. So we're certainly not the first generation of people that are having like a life-altering traumatic global experience, but we could be the first generation that takes the trauma resolution this serious and realizes up until this point, we've been living and negotiating and navigating in a way that's based on other generations' traumatic experiences. So that's like kind of the macrocosm, is that most of our society is set up on a traumatic origin. Then, yes.
Yeah, carry on.
Well, then you go into like our personal experience, and all of us have these kind of traumatic things happen that we kind of tuck away somewhere into our psyche, and then we're trying to get better. So we have some sort of health diagnosis. We decide to have a different experience of relationship or career, or, you know, we're living in a time where people are more into personal growth and into expanding beyond what was possible for their family or for other generations. And to do that is just to say, I'm willing to look at traumatic things that happened. And we don't always realize that's like kind of part of the deal of getting to a bigger level than what's happened before. And so we'll think we really want something. We'll think we're really ready to be compliant with the protocol. We're really ready to work with a practitioner. We paid all this money to be in this program or work with this coach or to do this trip. And it's like, it's not happening. And really what it is we have to be willing to give it up. Whatever it is we've been hiding, compartmentalizing, crunching around to like keep kind of hidden, at a certain point to go to the next level in our resolution of anything major, we have to be willing to get it up and give it up. And the closer we get to that, the more the protection is going to happen. And so the protection of not dealing with this thing that made us feel very unsafe is behavior patterns that are going to look like being flaky, being cold, being inconsistent, and being a self-sabotager. And a lot of times in the personal growth coaching world, we can feel really shamed for our resistance and for our self-sabotage. We're already in a trauma response oftentimes if we're behaving that way. And so it can be silly. It can be like getting more love. Like I've had clients who are in some of my deeper dive retreats and programs where their pattern has been burning bridges with people. And, you know, as someone gets too close and too loving and too kind, now that's their arch enemy. Like they come up, you know, and I've seen that happen too, where it's not just, I don't feel accepted, I don't belong. I see people receive a lot of love and compassion, and that can be triggering, because that the more love and compassion you get, the more the nervous system begins to land, we begin to open, and then whatever it is that's been back there is going to come out. And I think we're seeing that in just so many people having to be with themselves and be in a relationship and a lifestyle that they didn't realize they had a small window of tolerating. And it turns out that the life they had outside helped them to not deal with some of the traumas and some of the things that keep them in this small window of tolerating. And now we're all here and we're with ourselves, and it's like we're calling our bluff on ourselves of like, how much do I really love my life? How much am I really at peace with what I've created around myself? And that's when you can get to that space and not be re-traumatized, because sometimes coaches and people, we can push ourselves, we can be hard on ourselves, we can hire people who are hard on us. And it's like, you keep pushing on someone that's already in a trauma response, you're just creating more symptoms, whether it's a doctor, a coach, or anything else. You're just creating more trauma symptoms. And now you're just sitting in a story of symptoms instead of actually getting to the root.
So such a great point. And like having met with so many practitioners in this space over the last 15 years, I feel like everyone designs their clinical experience around the small percentage of people who don't have that trauma and just like fly through the program and crush it, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's program is designed around that. Well, look, and here's the billboard of, James, who like came in and lost 300 pounds in a short period of time, but ultimately like there's no real plan, to really start to work with the people who are non-compliant. It's just like, oh, they were non-compliant, they didn't do what they're meant to do. No, it's no reflection on me as the practitioner to be able to deal with that. Whereas ultimately, why I wanted to have this conversation and what I feel like we're doing at Fine Functional is to really give people an opportunity to get into some of those things first, because I think every functional medicine doctor would love to have people coming through who just were ready to go and did it all, and that would make that interaction great. But I think there's something that has to be like engaged, acknowledged, and dealt with, so that that experience can have the most chance of working. And I feel like it's something a little deeper here. So in your work with people over the years, like, what are some things that you've that you've identified as sort of patterns, and what are some of the ways that you've used to sort of break some of those patterns early on?
Yeah, beautiful. So, well, first, what I would say is just from the perspective of a practitioner, and you kind of bring it up here with the with like the functional medicine doctors or whoever who creates the program based on someone who has no issues doing great. Also, it's like getting out of the role of making whatever happens with that person mean so much about you. So if we only deal with the people who we say we're self-accountable and we're willing to do the work, and we kind of shame or compartmentalize the people where it didn't really work out and we create the story, then we get to feel safe as a practitioner. We get to know like what I do works, look at all these great results. And like something that I feel like is important as any sort of practitioner is to not make what someone says. Listen, you got to like take constructive criticism and like do your work and be authentic and all of that. But it's like not making someone's outcome mean so much about you is the first piece. And so if we're going to take a look at trauma, we also don't want to push and pull. Like trauma is a slow unraveling and unwinding, because typically when we've had some sort of trauma, the way we usually handle that is going super hard and super fast, because that's one way of like not feeling, or total paralyzation of not doing anything. So like this, the sweets. And so if we go super hard and make someone look at trauma before they've trust themselves, let alone us, that's not the greatest. And if we also compartmentalize and don't deal with that and say like, that's your story and it's not relevant here, that's not great either. So we want to find the sweet spot where when there's a lot of trauma, when there's not a lot of trauma, when there's any sort of pattern where the reference point was like an upsetting, unresolved, traumatic thing, we want to get into the sweet spot of just slow consistency, because like that's the spot that's really hard to stay in if you do have some sort of trauma operating your decisions. We usually want to go really hard or we want nothing. This middle point, which is like the balance, which is like, balance is where the healing happens. Like that's a very vulnerable place to be. So oftentimes someone with a trauma might kick ass in a program, and if it's like a 6-week thing or whatever, and just like shut down and numb out and just like get the A plus. And then the question is like, how are they doing in 3 months? How are they doing a year from now? Like sometimes we end up in a recovery from the sort of intense programs we do. I'm like a personal growth person who's done a ton of stuff. And certainly in this last year of like grief recovery, it's been some recovery of like, wow, I got the results, but at what cost? And how much further did I compartmentalize this other trauma? So like we want to just like come into the game with understanding it's not about us as the practitioner, like not making that so much of our personality and so much of who we are. And then we want to realize like slow and steady wins the race, and that like subtle can be powerful. So we just want to start with like first really giving the person back their own power, because what I've found is really important with like anything you're trying to do is you have to make a decision. So there's like a certain point, like if you're coaching people around business or around healing, basically anytime you're supporting someone around something they've never quite been able to have before, and they're not sure they can have, like a decision has to be made, and they need to decide that they are going to really become their own advocate and their own best friend. And it's like that can't be someone else's role. You can hire people that are basically just amplifying the decision you've already made and can give you some information you may not have, and can give you the feedback and the support and the warmth that is going to be important. But like, you must decide that you are now the safe space, and we're not waiting for, like, we can do the resolution, but we're not waiting for our parents to understand. We're not waiting for like the ex to understand. We're not waiting for our boss to understand. Like, we've created a situation where nobody feels safe, and everybody's been told to give their power to different forms of authority figures. And like, it's not the authority figure's life, it's your life. And it's like, first deciding, like, I'm the safe space, like I'm advocating for myself, and I'm getting myself away from relationships and environments that are not like supportive and loving and compassionate.
Beautiful. And that's one of the reasons why, we've, and obviously I wrote the book, the Community Cure, and encouraged doctors and practitioners to build these like group visits, because ultimately it was like taking the weight of all of this off their shoulders and not putting it all on the patient, but like spreading it out amongst a community where everyone will be able to do it. And like, certainly I felt for myself being part of this men's group for the last, year, is that like there's been many gains made in those sessions, like incremental gains. And I'm in a year's time, I'm a different person completely than I was a year ago, but there hasn't been like one moment where I changed my personality. It's just like slow increments of things that like I don't want anymore. And I guess this, ultimately I think what you're saying, what I hear you saying is that pretty much everyone, because of this COVID crisis now, we're all going to be operating from a certain amount of trauma, right, moving forward. And that ultimately, if it has to be an ongoing, steady relationship to dissipate it, that like professional trauma relief is going to be that expensive and unsustainable that it's only going to make the curve go even further upwards if we're looking at health costs. And therefore, we need to look at radically different structures to facilitate this. And ultimately, one of the structures that is just a part of our history actually is community. And if you think about it, much of this work, I feel like, might have been done by interaction between youngers and elders in the tribe historically.
Yes.
Right. And ultimately, we need to sort of re-energize the circle to be able to facilitate that, because from my experience as well, seeing other men go through their trauma and come back to traumatic events that have guided their behavior is actually, part of my process.
Oh, yes, yes. Like when we see, usually that's such a shamed, isolated, like we only see the success, we see the after. We very rarely get, unless you do any sort of men's work, some sort of group community, like well-managed community experience, like how else can you possibly see people's process over time? Like we now have cultivated a whole society where like we all have our brands, like we're all professional brands that are trying to show you like, none of that and just this cool person that has it together. And even like a lot, it's become more, I think, like it's become a bigger thing to share, like, hey, like this is the behind the scenes, what is really going on for me, with like someone, crying or shit. But even that's cultivated. Do you know what I mean? Like even that was a crafted, it's like you just can't help it. Like it's still crafted.
It's a message to build credibility, and it's like tactical vulnerability, right?
Right. And like basically like we have to lose control to really heal it. And like how that happens is over time, working slow and steady, like, taking down the ego and the story, and just like working with a, committed group of people over time, where we get to see each other's process. And like, it's a huge thing to be witnessed in those parts of those traumatic origin stories, and just be able to let it go. Because oftentimes the reason we still carry these things, which may or may not be like considered a big T or a little T trauma, but regardless, they're like impacting our life. We often don't get the care we need. right after that experience. You know what I mean? So often if we had a traumatic experience in school, it's like the next thing that happened was like three kids making fun of you and now the bell rings and you're sitting in class, or like family members that say something unkind and tell you to get over it, or the perpetrators, or like or you know, whatever the story is. Like so often the moments and days and weeks and months after something that really impacted us are less than ideal. And so like it is such a breakthrough, and you're really describing this right now, like it's such a breakthrough to be with other people and be that witness for them and also be witnessed and just like get what you needed at the time. And when you finally get what you needed at the time, like any sort of supplementation where it's like, hey, I've been out of whack in these areas or with these minerals or with these nutrients, it's like, get what you needed, let it dissolve. And like it can't dissolve until it gets what it needs. There's an intelligence to everything. There's certainly an intelligence to traumatized behavior and response. Like let's just have a dialogue with it and like get it done
Yeah.
and make that normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, I think there's that many great points that you're making there. I mean, ultimately, look, me and you have had many conversations over the years, and I had many conversations with your brother about like, what would it change? What would it take to really change healthcare? Like, what would that look like? And I think we're all kind of on this mission to like work this out. And I feel like,
Yeah.
one of the things that I wanted to just jump into is okay, well, what are the structures that can provide that? Because I see from what you just said there, my ability to go way off the radar has gone away by the fact that if something traumatic comes up for me in a week, I know that there's going to be like a catchment area of support and love and acknowledgement that is like in this weekly weekly ongoing support. And I just feel like that that means that at least within a week, but probably within a couple of days, depending on what day of the week it happens, I can like get some good feedback. And ultimately, like I'm connected to all the brothers in my group too, so that we have an opportunity to deal with it if something comes up that's really whack on a certain day. And, I guess part of what we've been looking to do with Fine Functional is to put these kind of conversations at the front, because I think it would save everyone. It's kind of, it can be traumatic, I would imagine, for people who commit to a multi-$1,000 program and then don't follow through with it because they haven't dealt with the trauma, and that compounds to their own feeling of inadequacy, right?
They feel terrible. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And you know what I think it is too? It's just like, let's all stop working it out unconsciously, because it's just so many coaches and practitioners are working out their unresolved stuff and wanting to be in the control, and then like working it out with patients that are not, like everyone's just working these things out because it's what we have to do as human beings to evolve. And I just feel like there's so much technology, like we're just evolving in so many ways with technology and just the world. And like I was thinking about that today, like the other evolution has to be the spectrum of emotion, and like the spectrum of like how we relate and share emotionally, like has to expand as all this other technology and infrastructure expands. Otherwise we lose the humanity in what we're doing, which is kind of like what's already happened, because we expanded technology, but we didn't expand the discussion of like emotional health and well-being. And in fact, we created a story that like success happens when we compartmentalize that and we keep expanding in all these other ways. Like, my question for you too is like, do you feel like there was a moment where you decided I'm going to be consistent with this? Like, because it took probably some vulnerability to get to the point to be in this men's work. Like, even for people who are watching this, like, was there a decision that you made that was just like, I'm going to show up for this all the time?
I think, part of it was like a micro decision to go to the first meeting. And then part of it was like witnessing how healthy the interaction was, right? The right structure,
Yeah.
the people who were there, the work that happened, and participating in that. And then the shift that I felt in there from doing my own work was certainly something. And it was really safety.
Yeah.
It was safety that's created. There was a great quote in the book, which was that, that community is the only way or the most effective way that we have to create safety, right? It's like more than like doing Kundalini meditation or changing your diet or whatever, like there's a certain safety in being, in community of people who are sort of like-minded and obviously there to like help each other out. There's another great quote from Wayne Jonas. He says that being in a group visit is like having 15 unpaid health coaches, right? It's almost like we're all there helping each other, get healthy and ultimately, yeah. So that was my experience, is like witnessing, first of all, a micro commitment to showing up to the group,
Yeah.
then a bigger commitment to be there consistently for a period of weeks, then a bigger commitment to go to a weekend and experience what the sort of like, the real guts of what it means to be part of this community is, and then an ongoing commitment to hold my seat. And part of what I feel with functional medicine is that we ask for the macro commitment first, which is,
Yeah.
are you going to be committed to change behavior, do the lab testing, completely change your way that you understand the way that the human body works, and this and that and this. And like, I understand why some people aren't ready to go there, because they believe in science, or they have all these other things that are going in their mind and they can't change all these things simultaneously. So I've always just thought to myself, how do we have people have a micro commitment? So in Fine Functional, it's like for $49, you can meet someone who's reversed their own chronic illness, and you're going to get introduced to the whole concept of functional medicine. You're going to go through a process of mapping out your own triggers and start to have this own journey of self-identification. You're going to learn about trauma, and you're going to go through this piece. And then you're like, hey, wow, I learned a lot from that. That was like a big shift in my mindset. And now I've started doing these other things differently. And then it's like, hey, guess what? For like another few couple $100, you could be in a 12-week process with people online in a group where you're actually going to like meet other people that want to get better and go through that process. Okay, I want to, sign up for that. And then, the goal is that most people after that are just better. Like if you look at the Cleveland Clinic, they put people through these micro groups for 10 weeks. And at the end of it, half the people never need to see the doctor because they're just better from whatever chronic illness they had. And then the next step is, okay, if you're not one of those people that's better, there's an amazing functional medicine community that's out there. But now you have this like internal momentum and clearing some of this stuff up so that you could come in, get the protocol and be one of those people that just does it. And I feel like, this to me has been something that's been the missing piece. And this came from like many conversations with your brother, where we saw that like, if someone asked me that they wanted to get started with this alternative medicine, functional medicine, whatever I was calling it at that point, the first place for most people to start was not the most expensive diagnosis with the like biggest, ninja doctor, but someone who you could have a real conversation about what is driving the behaviors and why those behaviors exist, and dealing with this like internal list that we all have of things that we know are unhealthy for us, but we do anyway because of the trauma responses that are guiding our behavior.
Right. Like we don't have loving ourselves is not a compelling enough reason. Why? You know what I mean? Like that has to be the question. But I love what you just described for Fine Functional and in your own process. It's exactly that like slow and steady middle line between the hard and fast, between doing nothing. There's what if you, because see, I'm in recovery of being an intensity junkie. Like I always did the most intense program, the most expensive program, with the crazy, like how crazy can we make it to have the craziest healing? And I'm the person who would like meet them and be like, what's the 1 month intensive where you just leave right now and get in the car? Like that used to be totally me. And like, so I want to speak to anyone who's like an intensity junkie like me. It's like, this becomes intense. The subtle, steady, inconsistent, incremental, like, is this working enough? Are we doing enough in these sessions? Am I, like that is going to come up for a lot of people when we begin this model you're talking about is with the incremental consistent, like it's going to bring up fear of like, is this enough? Is this doing anything if I'm not feeling like pain and like more trauma? And so like when we have that origin, I grew up with a lot of wild things happening with healthcare and my family and stuff. So I was just used to things feeling like beautiful but chaotic all the time. And so I was always like creating healing opportunities that were beautiful and chaotic and ultimately like I crashed at the end and then had to recover, and then here we go again. So I love what you're saying, because even though that's one way to do it, it's not how we can do what's happening in the world right now. Like, we already had our big chaotic thing. Like, nobody needs another hard and fast recovery. We now need that slow, incremental, and learning how to find the intensity in the subtle is, like, I think really our next step. So I just love the way you described that fine functional and why that is the way it is. And that's why I'm so happy to be here with you talking about that. Like, it, I know how important it was through the years for
Yeah.
you and me as you talked about that.
What are some of your thoughts? One of the concepts that's come up is a little bit of helping people develop some sort of emotional regulation.
Right.
Right. And what are some of the tools that you've used in your coaching and in groups to be able to help people like make, because the shift that we're talking about making at the beginning of Fine Functional is really that shift from health is someone else's responsibility to bestow upon me to like ultimately this is on me and I'm going to take guidance and do it. But that shift is hard. And ultimately, functional medicine doctors don't always facilitate that shift because it's actually a lot easier for them to sit in the expert chair, right? Where it's just like, oh, they've got the magic protocol, not pharma, not, immunosuppressive drugs. It's healing the gut and doing the detox and those kind of things. And I guess I just want to like, just come into, if you're starting with someone who's traumatized and they haven't been able to make the changes to their lifestyle in order to get resolution, what are some of the core things that you do with people initially to facilitate that movement to sovereignty?
Totally. So like what I first just wanted the caveat, and I say that in the videos too, is just like, depending on the severity of the trauma and depending on what sort of practitioner you are, it's like, don't put that on yourself to fix something that's really deep and severe if that's not your specialty. So like, depending on where someone is at, I might refer them to like a trauma therapist. Even for myself this year, I've been, my own PTSD healing, it was like, I've got my healers, I've got my functional people, but it's like, give me the therapy twice a week, please. Like, you need to know, like, it needs to be a village. I mean, that's what you and I learned, I think, through this year, and gave you through the years. Like, it needs to be like a functional person could be comfortable referring to another type of practitioner, depending on what someone needs.
Yeah, and ultimately, we've made efforts to facilitate that with the functional medicine meetups, right? So that
Right.
the psychotherapist can show up and talk about trauma, and all the doctors can realize, oh wow, I remember, oh yeah, I've got 5 patients that I'm thinking of that acted like that, and maybe that is a good person to send off, and they might come back to me later but ultimately, like that person's going to get help.
Right. So it's like, I think it would be across the board. Anyone who's going to sit in front of someone to help them should have a rough understanding of trauma and trauma response so they can like learn to identify it. It doesn't mean every practitioner needs to be the person that heals the trauma. So like, we just want to like recognize that like everyone needs a working knowledge, and then everyone needs a working knowledge of how to refer to the appropriate person. So that would be number one. And then like number 2 is the permission. And then it's like, I do all sorts of deeper spiritual work and more, I guess like 3D sort of coaching with people. And what I just find is breath. Like, it's so basic, but it's like most people are not breathing, and most people are not like really connected to their body. So it's like, it sounds like almost cliche to me, but it's like the basic things of just like learning how to breathe. And I'll just like walk people through a session where the whole session is us just like breathing in these different things and feeling what that, like, if we could turn whatever we're talking about into something you could breathe into your body, breathe it in. What does that feel like? Like things like that, where people usually compartmentalize that into like, that's a certain type of person, that's a certain type of woo thing. But it's like, just start to breathe and drink water and like stretch and like things like that, where you begin to let the nervous system and the body know, like, I'm here. We're not going past your limits. We're not stopping. You're not going to experience neglect, and you're not going to experience overwork from me anymore. You're going to get food consistently. We're going to drink water. We're going to stretch. We're going to breathe. Like, those are these very basic things that a lot of people don't actually have a real relationship with. And that's how the body just works. That's how someone could just do the group coaching and not need to do more, is like now they have the community handled, and now they have these like basic ways of being handled. And then like the other thing I would just say that I would initially do with someone is just like a lot of permission, just like a lot of compassion and a lot of permission that like right where they are is totally okay. And we are here as I call my company has been called Soul Innovator. That's what I always called my company. And it's like, we're here to innovate and introduce new and positive change to the already existing environment, to the already existing way things were done. So it's like, for you to have this trauma or this unresolved thing is because you're here to breathe a new way of being into this thing, a new way of being into relationships, a new way of being in the body. Like, did you come from a family where everyone got sick and was toxic and like no one went to the doctor until they were like on their deathbed? Or, you know, like, it's okay. Wherever you are is okay. You're the innovator. You're innovating this thing. And that's why it's troubling you. And the first thing is first, we're going to have a lot of compassion and a lot of permission for where things are right now. It's all good.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that's great tips for everyone who's watching. And that's what we're going to provide at Fine Functional. There's a lot of permission,
A lot of
a
permission.
structure for you to get into a process of you doing these healthy behaviors. You know, I guess I just want to the last question I want to ask you is just, you know, we've had a pause, right, as a society here. And part of the reason why I felt like I wanted to take this pause to be able to like, okay, let's think about what order we send people through this process. If we're going to build a disease recovery system, now that we're having this pause, let's just pause a minute to think about this and do that. And I guess I would just love for you to sort of talk about the pause that's needed, because it sounds like, from my own experience as well, there was a moment where we had to just kind of stop doing what was happening before we could start doing the new thing. And I just wonder whether or not this, I think a lot of people have written and blogged about that on a societal level, this is our pause. And what does that mean to come down to the individuals?
Yeah, it's like really, it's really amazing, because I feel like so many people have talked about like where the world is heading, where culture is heading, where healthcare is heading. And it's like, it can be a little frightening, but it's like, this is it. Like, how was any of what we say needs to happen going to happen unless literally everything got unplugged? Like, there is no way to reset. I mean, that's how we reset anything. You got to unplug it. So it's like, there is no way to have any sort of reset without this level of an unplugging. And it's scary because we've never seen this, in our society right now. But like, it's first of all, just realizing like this makes sense. And then what I always like to remember is like the world is always reflecting. It's like there's an inner world and there's an outer world. So if the outer world is reflecting that we need to stop, we need to pause, we need to reassess, that's a reflection of my own life. It's an opportunity for each of us to do that individually. And so often we have a story. I mean, I know I have this, and I know many people I've worked with are like, but I'm not telling everyone to like leave their whole life, but it's just always like, I can't leave this relationship, or like, I could never leave this job, or I could never stop doing whatever weird thing they're doing that's not like really for the thing they're trying to have happen. It's like that thing needs to go. And we just always have a story of like everything would fall apart if I let go of this thing, if I put it on pause, if I took a break. And so this is such an amazing opportunity. I think those of us who have had a shock or a loss or a trauma, like when you've had the experience of feeling like everything was taken away from you, you realize how few things it's actually accurate. Like basically it's just your breath. It's basically like if your breath is taken away, now you're screwed as far as staying alive. But pretty much everything else, like we are resilient. Like we can take a break and reset and reconfigure, and like it's going to be okay. And I know that I'm saying that while many people are obviously in the struggle right now, but that's more indicative of just like an infrastructure and a way of living that was not supportive, like for the individual or for the greater collective. Like ultimately we were living in an unsupported, unsustainable way. And so like, we're seeing that right now, but like, we can take this pause, we can reset, we can alchemize this trauma into like a lot of wisdom and power, and just that's the difference. Like we've had generations that had trauma and then got very resourceful. I think we can be a generation that resolves the trauma and has that sort of power and wisdom uh, that comes from really doing that sort of work.
Well, here's to that. So
Yeah,
I'm super excited. We're on the same page and we're doing it. So thank
happening.
you for all the work. Thank you for the conversations over the years and for the content that you provided. If you're listening to this and you are interested in getting started with Find Functional, there is actually a module from Alee in the initial Path to Health package that can really help you to get into this conversation, build some of those skills, start to understand what it's going to take to facilitate that from you. And we're ultimately just trying to create bite-sized pieces to create wholeness. And I think that's really the journey that we're all on. And this is an experiment, and it's an experiment in ordering care in a different way to get the result that we want, which is self-efficacious, loving humans, part of community, helping other people through their path in the world. And I really salute you, Alee, and acknowledge you for living it and doing the work, and now being able to be in a position to really add value from a place of really knowing what this feels like, what it is like, how it plays out in the world. And I'm really excited to see what we can do together in the next decade.
Oh, same. Thank you, James. This was such a great, exciting conversation to have, and I think a timely conversation. And I really want to reflect the same to you. Like, I'm really always, inspired by your enthusiasm and your fire, but also like the consistency with all these conversations. Like, it's amazing. You've been doing these 5 days a week. You have all sorts of amazing people on. It's a lot of energy to engage and connect and really go there every day. And like, I thank you for doing it. I think this is really supportive to many different people.
Well, I hope so. And yeah, I think it's just a question about like putting the stake in the ground to say, this is what we're doing. This is where the path forth. And I think that, there's a video that I'm going to recommend to everyone who's watching. We'll put it on the Rogue Health Economist later today, which is the 5 reasons why functional medicine hasn't worked for you yet. And I think that will hopefully unpack some of what we've talked about here today, and will start you on the journey wherever you are to think about what could be the next step for you. And so thanks so much for watching. Check out findfunctional.com/start to get started on what we've talked about here today. We are starting our Immune Collaborative, which is our virtual online group to help people build immune resilience and build resilience generally, start to build these healthy behaviors. So you can join us starting on June the 9th is when our first group starts. Thanks so much for being part of today's conversation. Alee Hoffman, thanks for being part of it.
Yep.
This has been the Rogue Health Economist. We are up to episode 19. We have an incredible week lined up. Join us on Thursday when we're going to be hearing from someone who's running for Senate in Idaho on a Functional Medicine for Everyone platform. We're going to have a good conversation there. And on Friday, we're going to be with Dr. David Katz. And Dr. Katz, I think, has been sort of a revelation during COVID to be able to really talk into, and he has a relentless commitment to, and I'm going to acknowledge him for this the first time we speak, is a relentless commitment to the social determinants of health. He understands how important those are, and he understands what kind of impact we're making at that level during this. Trauma is a part of that. But looking forward to that, and that's this Friday. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Alee Hoffman.
Thanks all.
And we'll see you again next time.